Are you coming back to school with me? We could have done it all so easily.
Hi, my name is Craig Thompson-Wood. I'm your host on Teaching with Board Games. This video today is in being prepared for an educational conference in Nigeria and coming to you all the way from Canada. So thank you to Bassey of Lyndem Edutainment for reaching out to me and asking for some ideas on how I might be able to share my knowledge and my experience with gamification and game-based learning and how you might implement that in your classrooms. This is, of course, also a crash course for other people as well, anywhere in the world really, who would like to get some ideas of how we can easily and successfully implement gamification and game-based learning in our classrooms. Today's video is going to be in 5 parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about gamification and game-based learning. What are the differences and how do they apply to education? Secondly, I'm going to be talking about some simple ideas for gamification, which are at no or very low cost to you to implement into your classroom. 3 is ideas for game-based learning, which again are no or low cost for you to be implementing into your classroom. 4th, I'm going to be talking about how to actually implement games into your classroom and gamification, how those can be incorporated into your daily routines. And 5th, I will talk about where you can go for more information. If you're still unsure about some things that I've talked about, or maybe still have some questions about some other things, then where do you go for some more information? I'll wrap up the video with that. So let's get right to it. Number 1, gamification versus game-based learning. So gamification is, in its simple definition, is adding game-like elements to something which is not a game. So a few quick ideas on how you might gamify a classroom would be things like, having experience points or points in the class, having badges, having little challenges, just making game experiences within the classroom out of what would normally be just a regular classroom. We'll talk more about that in a little bit when I get to that section. So what are the benefits then? Why do this? Well, classrooms which are gamified have higher engagement with the students, and students will also exhibit higher levels of concentration on their work because they're engaged in something that's actually interesting to them than just learning the facts that they're supposed to learn. Secondly, students will be more comfortable and more relaxed, which will allow them to then open up, to be prepared to be, willing to make mistakes. And mistakes are part of the learning, so that's a really important thing for them to be comfortable to be able to do. And they're also going to be gaining that practice because they're willing to make those mistakes, because they're willing to try, because they are engaged in the gameplay. Gamification can provide visible forms of tracking progress, seeing progress through things like experience points, leaderboards, badges, things like that, so students can visually track their own progress. The learning that is done is improved. Students become more motivated to learn. We get into what we call the intrinsic motivation, where initially through the gamification, students are getting an extrinsic reward, so maybe the points that they are receiving is a reward for their good work. Eventually, though, as they start to learn more and develop more, they will eventually get to that level of intrinsic motivation where they are learning because they know that it's making them a better person, not needing that external reward like points or something else to encourage them and motivate them to learn. And my final point with gamification and game-based learning, which to me is the biggest thing, is that my experience is that students who are involved in games and gameplay, particularly in board games, they become lifelong learners, because anytime you're learning a new game, then you are reading rules, you're listening to rules, you are socializing with other people, you are learning the skills involved in the game. Maybe there's points, in which case then you're practicing your math skills. There is just so much learning that happens within any game that it's a really great thing to get students engaged and interested in gamification from an early age, because then that will help them to become, as I say, lifelong learners, learning well into their adulthood and continuing on for the rest of their lives. So then on the other side then, the game-based learning would be learning that happens through the play of an actual game. So gamification, there is no game per se. It is the learning that you're doing normally. So if I make a quiz show out of science questions, that would be gamification, whereas game-based learning now would be where you have an actual physical game that you're using to do the teaching. So for example, in my classroom, if I was using Word on the Street as an example of one game that I've used in my language class, then that would be a game that would be an example of game-based learning, because the game is being used as the vehicle for the teaching. So in synopsis, gamification is just game elements onto something which is not a game, whereas game-based learning is the game being used for the learning. So let's talk about some simple ways that we can gamify a classroom. How can we incorporate some of these gamification elements into your classroom? And these ideas, as I said, are of little or no cost at all, depending on how you want to implement them. The most common thing you might see in a gamified classroom would be a point system. So students might achieve points for doing particular things. This can commonly be done for academics. So when they're getting things right, when they're handing in work, things like that, then you're going to give them points for doing the things that they need to do. The more points they earn, then you can track their progress by points, and different things can be achieved by the points. I know in my classroom, we have a thing where the students have, they create like some sort of character at the beginning of the year, and throughout the year, as we're going through, they will get points for things that they're doing, and as they reach certain numbers of points, then they will go up a level. And every time they reach an odd level, so 1, 3, 5, 7, they gain more powers for their characters. And the powers for their characters have different abilities that they can use in the classroom to do different things. And if you're interested in that, then I would invite you to contact me. Rather than me spend a lot of time talking about this one particular system I'm employing, then you can contact me and I will gladly share that information with you. But so for not only for academics can you use the points, but you can also use the points for things like that are not academic, that you want to encourage particular behaviors. So for example, having the agenda out and open, ready to write down the start of the day announcements would be, and rewarding those students who have their agendas out without having to be reminded would be a great way to give points. I know in my classroom once, there was a time where I had a student teacher, and she and I were noticing that many of the students at the end of the day were not stacking their chairs like we'd asked them to. And I said to her, watch this. And I told them at the end of one day, I said, okay, I'm going to reward points to those students who are remembering to stack their chairs. Well, immediately we saw a complete difference in the number of chairs being stacked. It was a complete turnaround. Whereas most of the class before was not stacking their chairs, now most of the class was stacking their chairs. And even some students were going around stacking chairs that hadn't been stacked, that weren't their chairs, just in hopes of maybe achieving a few extra experience points for doing this extra work, because they know that's how they get rewarded through the points, by doing these kinds of good behaviors. So those kinds of things it's amazing, because there's like no cost at all to you, but it really motivates the students, because they have that thing they can see, they can achieve, they know how many points they have, and they can get these things which are really just arbitrary. I mean, you're just giving out the points for those things you're observing that you want to, encourage in your classroom, but it really has no monetary value or cost to you or anything, but the students will be so motivated to try to achieve more just to get some of those points. So if you're going to employ the point system, then another thing you can also do as well is perhaps have a leaderboard up on somewhere posted in your classroom, tracking maybe the students who are on the top, how many points they have, and the other students can then try to see how many they have and how many they need to achieve in order to catch up or to get onto the leaderboard themselves. You have to be careful with this, though. I mean, this is the kind of thing which you really need to know your class for, because some students, it might have the opposite effect on. So if they, for example, see that, this person has, let's say 10,000 points and they only have like 500 points, well, then they start to feel like, well, what's the point? And they may just give up. So that leaderboard is one that I would caution you on. but in the right circumstances, in the right ways, it still can be good. And as long as you are making sure that some students do have that way of feeling that they can catch up, or maybe you're resetting the board after a week, after a month, however you choose. But as I say, know your students. And this, with any gamification thing that you're doing, you should make sure that you understand your audience, your students, and how they're going to react to these gamification elements that you're implementing into your classroom. So the third thing you can do is classroom challenges. So classroom challenges can be anything from where you do students versus students. So you do, like, maybe call one student each up at a time, and they can just go against each other to see who can answer the question first. That's one idea. Another one would be, as I've mentioned previously, like creating a game board, if in the style of maybe like the game show Jeopardy, where you can ask like a quiz show games, and you're having the students compete against each other in that way. Usually when I'm doing the Jeopardy games, I will divide the class into groups, or maybe into two sides. They often like to play boys versus girls, and if you're okay with that, then that's something you can do. But this is what this does is it just creates a fun way for you to review the information that you've been covering. I tend to do this at the end of my science units, and it's always a very welcome, a very excitable time for the students, because they love having this fun competition. But really, in my mind, we are reviewing the information and really engaging the students in reviewing the information, because it's being done in a fun way. And the final simple idea I have for gamification for classrooms would be incorporation of badges. So badges can be done on paper or digitally, or however you can make it for the thing. I tend to do this myself. When I do it for my students, I tend to just do it on paper. I tend to have a drawn picture, and I copy that, and I just cut them out, and I hand them to the students when they achieve a particular badge. So badges can be really for anything, again, that you are trying to encourage in your classroom. If you're trying to do say attendance, or punctuality, keeping the desk area clean, getting homework done, academic achievement, whether it be for a particular subject area, getting high scores. It could just really here the idea for badges is only limited by your own imagination. So just think about what kinds of behaviors you want to motivate within the class, and make badges to reward that. So in synopsis then, for the gamification, what you need to do is you need to think about your class. What kinds of behaviors do you want to encourage? What kinds of behaviors do you want to discourage? And how are you going to use these game elements in order to encourage these behaviors that you want in your classroom? So in conclusion then, in creating a gamified system, you just want to be aware of the different gamified systems that are out there, the different kinds of elements that you could be possibly incorporating into your classroom. Then you want to be thinking about the kids and what is going to motivate them, because what is going to motivate the very young students is going to be different from your older students. So you want to make sure that you are aware of your audience here, aware of your students, and what is going to work for them. Then you want to create the system with them in mind, and as you're trying it, be aware of the system and whether it is working. Again, sometimes gamified systems in some things, like I said with the leaderboards, could have that opposite effect of where students are feeling like throwing their hands up in despair and saying, I'm so far behind in points or whatever, it's just, I give up. You don't want that. So always be maintaining and watching, and as you continue with this, continue to see how you might grow and develop, evolve your gamified system. If you need any more ideas or would like more ideas on this, you can always come chat with me, and I will be happy to share my ideas with you, and where you can look as well for more ideas. Number 3 is simple games for game-based learning in the classroom. So some simple games that you could be creating on your own to incorporate in your classroom usage, and these can be useful for a variety of different ages. So the first one I just recently did a video for, and this is the Make It Yourself, Made by You memory cards. So this is where you have sets of memory cards So you have the answers on one card, so these are like equal signs, and then the other one, it's question marks. So you have these all spread out on the table, so you have all your question marks on one side, your equals on the other, and students can just play this on their own. So they're looking for, so in this one I have multiplication, so on this one's 4 times 12, and this is a 28, so if I picked up these two, that doesn't match, so I put them back down again. So your basic memory game with a little bit of a twist. And so again, this kind of thing can be modifiable for the ages that you're looking at. So if you have students who are very young, then you can be doing maybe simple addition. To the older kids, like this was made for grade 5 students, this would then be something you can play with that age range. So depending again on the needs of your students, and there would be a whole range of things you could be doing with this in terms of the kinds of questions you have on there, questions and answers. So again, only limited by your own imagination. The second game I have to talk to you about would be like a scavenger hunt. And the scavenger hunt would be something that the students would do, so where they would be actively moving. So this could be especially good for students who in your classroom who have trouble maybe sitting still for long periods of time. So the scavenger hunt, what you'd be doing, I don't have an example here with me now, but if you're using cards like this, you would write on the card a clue of where to look next for the next card. And so you might say, look under the desk, look under the piece of furniture which is used by the educator. So this would maybe be for older students, so big words like furniture, educator, understanding what you're talking about. So look under the piece of furniture used by the educator, well, the teacher's desk. So then they have to go look underneath the teacher's desk to find the next clue. And then that would lead them to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. So this kind of thing could be a very simple way to implement some reading skills then. So if and it gets the students moving around, gets them active, and can be a fun way to be doing some learning in that way. The third one is what is actually, I believe, to be the oldest board game in the world, which is Mancala. And Mancala is a game which is you could literally draw it in the sand, and you could use stones or any other material for the beads that you play with. The picture here shows the Mancala board, if you're not familiar with it already. And so, but I mean, you could look up the rules for that one. And this is the kind of thing which you don't need to have a fancy set for, but you could create your own. And this could be a fun art project even. We did this in my classroom one year when I'd first introduced Mancala to my class, and they were all very excited by it. And I only had the one board. So what I said instead was, let's create some Mancala boards using recycled materials. So this could be a fun art activity for you to do in your class as well, and then students can have their own Mancala boards to take home with them. And these are only just a few of the ideas that are out there for things you could be doing for very simple ideas for games in the classroom to make yourself. As I go on with my own YouTube channel, I will be putting more and more ideas out there of games that people can be making on their own to include in the classroom. But you can also look for yourself, just do some research on the internet and see what other people are suggesting for ways to create games for the classroom. Because as I say, I don't want to spend all the time talking about a whole bunch of different ideas of things where you can maybe look up some of those yourself, or come back to me later and I will be happy to share more ideas with you and when I get them. All right, so the fourth thing is how to implement the gamification and the game-based learning into the classroom. Well, with the gamification, I've already talked about how you might do that with, that stuff is done in the background. So once that is in place, it kind of is an ongoing thing which you are just doing the maintenance for. You are tracking the points for the leaderboards. You are updating anything that you need to update, but overall, once the gamified, you need to explain it first off. You need to make sure the students understand the rules and how things work inside that system. But once they have that, then it is simply a case of maintenance of the system. But for the game-based learning, this can be a little more tricky as to how do you do that. Well, there's a couple things that you can do that I'm going to share with you now. The first would be simply when the students are on a recess, particularly if it's rainy weather or bad weather, the students are not going outside, then having the games available inside for them to be playing instead of just running around wild or doing whatever else. Trying to encourage them and focus them towards the games would be a great way to have them learning even during the times when it's a recess, a break from school. So just having those kinds of things available and knowing that they have access to them would be one great way to just make sure that the students are getting chances to play the games. The second thing requires a bit of setup on your part, you the teacher, but it really does pay off in the long run. So what I'm going to put up on the screen now is I'm putting up on the screen a picture of a classroom, and I'm just showing you an example classroom here with just 25 students. And in this classroom of 25 students, there is they are dividing up into 5 groups. Now each of the 5 groups is going to have a separate assignment to work on. Now this takes a bit of work to set up in the beginning. The students have to understand what is expected of them in each of those 5 different centers. So you would need to have some class time to explain each of the centers, to practice each of the centers. So maybe at the beginning, if the first center is, say we're looking at a language class, for example, and in the language class, everybody's reading silently. Well, hopefully they're able to do that. Hopefully that is not something you need to explain to them how to do. The second one, say, is working on spelling activities. So maybe you have some books or things that they're practicing, the spelling activities. The third center is meeting with you, the teachers, so they would need to know what the expectations are of when they come to you, what work should they be bringing, and what kinds of things are you going to be working on. The fourth center would maybe be something after they've worked with you, what are they working on after that? Are they working on some maybe they've done some reading with you out loud so you can listen to their reading skills, and then after that they go on to their own and they are working on developing those skills, answering some questions, maybe after you've had a chance to look at samples of their writing and have given them notes for them to fix, they can go back and work on fixing that. And then the fifth center would be the game center. So in order to do this, the students would first need to know how to play the game. So this may be where you'd have to have a class-wide instruction in the first place, explain the rules of the game, showing them how the game is played, making sure that they understand that. Maybe even at the beginning, you could have maybe 2 centers of reading and have the students, when they come to you, you could be showing them how to play the game. Once all the groups have cycled through, so every day the groups would cycle through to a different grouping, and at the end of that grouping, once all the groups have gone through the cycle, then the students who are playing the game could then play independently, and they would play the game on their own. And this is where you would be looking for games which are appropriate for the learning of your students, for their age, for their levels of learning, and have them playing the game independently at that time. So as I mentioned, I've used games like Word on the Street. I've used things like different forms of bingos, or you could use games like Boggle or Scrabble. A card version of that's very similar to Scrabble is called Paperback. There are a lot of different games you could be implementing into the classroom through this method of centers, as we call it. So by having the centers in the classroom, one of the centers being a game center, it allows for you to have that opportunity for the game-based learning right there in the classroom. And on to the last part now, where I'm talking about where to go for more information. Well, to my mind, the best source of information for anything to do with board games and gamification as well would be onto Board Game Geek. And I'll put the link down below me right now so you can look at that. On there, they have every board game that's ever been made. They have reviews, they have forums. So there's a lot of great information there about games. But if you also look into the forums section on Board Game Geek, they're going to have people who are there chatting about different ideas and sharing things that you can learn about. I also know that I'm a member of a few groups on Facebook which are around game-based learning, gamification in the classroom and things. So if you are on Facebook, this is another resource you could be checking out. If you want to get information about specific games, then I would also suggest looking on YouTube. I tend to find a lot of great information on there about YouTube. So the nice thing about YouTube is you can see the components of the game. You can get maybe people's thoughts on the game. You can see sometimes how the game is played. So there's a whole range of things you can learn by watching YouTube videos. Or you can watch my YouTube video where I focus specifically on the games in terms of their use in education. You can always check that out as well, and I'd love to hear from the viewers. So if you have questions or things specifically around that, you can always message me there too. And that is the last thing I'd like to say, that if you have any questions at all about anything I've talked about today, or anything maybe I failed to mention today that you were still wondering about, then please do not hesitate to message me. I'm very grateful to Bassey for reaching out to me to ask me to do this. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for me to share my experience and my knowledge internationally. This is my first international experience, so I'm very happy to do that. And as I say, if there's anything I can do to help somebody else out there, then please let me know, and I'd be only too happy to answer your questions. Well, that is going to wrap it up for today. Until next time, I am Craig Thompson Wood, the host on the YouTube channel Teaching with Board Games, saying thank you for coming to the classroom.
Are you coming back to school with me?